with me. It's still coming up. Bear with me for 1 second, please.
Wait a minute, what happened?
The joys we have of 21st century technology. We'll get it up and running here just momentarily.
So while we're waiting, hi everybody. These are the jokes, folks. I just want to introduce myself if you don't know who I am. I am Kathleen Burgess. I'm the Director of Administrative Operations, and I'm going to stop. And Robbie, how you doing?
I'm good. And frankly, I'm ready to go now. Thank you very much, Kathleen.
That's the way it's jinxed it. That's fine.
Murphy's Law. Here we go. Thank you all.
That means they've never been in a debate. But back then, it was the same thing. I was only exposed to the negative. I grew up in the Rodney King era. I joined an activist group that espoused the same things that we're hearing today. The music I listened to, the movies I watched, everything was geared toward telling you that police officers were evil. But the difference between myself and the rest of the community is I was one of the few that stepped across the line and saw the other side. And what I saw on the other side was the vast majority of officers are decent human beings, but yes, there is a negative exception that we all need to work hard to try to root out. And I think we're trying to do that.
Over the years, the LA police force has had a bad rap as far as racism is concerned. That's not going to strike you as a news bulletin.
Well, I take the position that we've evolved. We're not the department that we were in the 1960s, 70s, or even the 90s. If you went to a roll call today, you wouldn't see just blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guys anymore. You would see Hispanics, Blacks, people from the LGBTQ community, people from all different faiths and walks of life.
What are you seeing on the street? Do you get the sense that people recognize and appreciate the changes you're talking about?
Well, I would say prior to the pandemic, we were seeing that. And then what happened in Minneapolis, that horrible tragedy with George Floyd. So a lot of people just ended up making up their own minds that all police are bad, that all police are inherently evil. And that's something that we're trying to combat as we speak.
On the other side of the country, at a high school on Johns Island, part of which falls within the city limits of Charleston, South Carolina, local cops show up for a monthly community circle.
Right now, if he like put his hand on my shoulder and I'd be like, yo, what's up with you?
School resource officer Adam Deming with the Charleston Police initiated the program after the death of George Floyd.
Like when you start seeing police, like coming around, you go, oh, what's going on?
Tell me, what's the biggest issue as far as that community appears to be concerned?
So inside of the school, they trust me, they trust the officers that I bring in, but outside of the school walls, they don't know if they can trust someone who isn't me or who isn't one of the group that they've been able to have these open dialogues with. And that's the question, well, how do we bridge that gap?
To stereotype them as automatically bad people when they put their uniform on is just wrong.
These meetings are helpful and well-intentioned, but they're no match for examples of police misconduct captured on a cell phone video and distributed worldwide on social media.
From my standpoint in the school, I feel like sometimes I'm taking 2 or 3 steps forward in the right direction and gaining the trust of more of my students and more of the community. And then an incident happens, whether it be local or whether it be nationwide, and it knocks me back.
6 years ago, North Charleston police were at the center of a national firestorm when this video went viral. A 50-year-old African-American, Walter Scott, was shot in the back while running away from police. He'd been stopped for having a non-functioning taillight. You had a situation in your community that got national attention. What was the reaction?
I've been told not to comment, I guess, on the Walter Scott incident. That's what I'm just being told. Sorry.
The city of North Charleston reached a $6.5 million settlement with Walter Scott's family. The white police officer who killed him is serving a 20-year prison sentence.
This isn't because of one incident. This is a bunch of incidents that have happened that are now easier to understand or see because they're literally recorded.
Patrick Skinner is a detective in Savannah, Georgia.
I don't speak for any department, but I know that there are many police officers that get it right, and I'm certain that there are departments that get it right. But as we've seen, every single department in every city is one video away from disaster.
At an age when many cops are considering retirement, Skinner, who's 50, has only been on the Savannah police force a little more than 4 years.
Before that, I worked with a security consultancy out of New York, but before that, I was a CIA case officer for about 7.5 years. Only left to take care of my dad, who was dying of Alzheimer's, and I came back home.
Skinner was born in Savannah.
I remember living here as a child, and I probably never thought about race because I was a white Southern kid, so I had the luxury of never thinking about race. And then right now, I'm a white Southern cop. I am literally the least persecuted person on the planet. I am aware of this. When people dismiss race, that means they've never been a victim of racism.
I'm honestly afraid to get out. Actually, what's going?
Take the recent case of Army Lieutenant Caron Nazario in Virginia, who was held at gunpoint and pepper sprayed during a traffic stop. You had a young African-American man in uniform, soldier, polite, calm, and yet he was pulled out of his car. How do you explain that to your nephews? I suspect there has to be a part of the conversation that says,
Why am I being treated like this?
You don't get away with the same thing that a white kid your age does.
Mm-hmm. And that's, you have to come at that right off the bat, and there's no mixing words with that. It's going to be different. And I try and encourage them to do the same thing. Be polite, be respectful. That military gentleman, he was being respectful and polite. The officer still did not treat him in a way that I would treat people. There are people that should be doing other things. They should not be in the line of work that they're in.
You ever think of quitting?
I have not thought of quitting. For me, it's one of the things where if I didn't stick around to do this job, who is going to take my place?
We're living in a world in which cops are taking early retirement.
Yeah.
Can you relate to that?
Absolutely. And it's disheartening to hear police officers across the nation leaving, quitting, and retiring so early, when right now, more than any other time in history, their communities need them. But I'm not angry at them for it because I understand exactly how they feel. Many times, police officers are made to be the tip of the spear for systemic failures like homelessness, like mental illness, like the school systems. When the system fails, guess who they call to deal with? The police, and they have to.
Ours is what Patrick Skinner refers to as this 911 nation.
When you call 911, unless your house is on fire, the police are coming. So it doesn't matter if your dog's loose, your car, the mechanics didn't fix it properly, you're in a minor car accident, your mailbox was hit, your husband's beating you, you're shooting, all these things. At every stage, the police officers are coming. There is nothing else but the police. And so for a long time, well, up to right now, we, the police, use that kind of as a realistic excuse because it is true. We are not social workers. We are not dog catchers. We are not mechanics, but we have to be during that 911 call.
We are actually responding to systemic failures, and we get blamed because we are the tangible form of government that people can say, bad government, look at what you're doing. So I think these systemic failures give society the perception that we failed. No, we are responding for the most part to failure. They're not just failing the community, they're also failing us as well.
Hello, I think we're back. Uh, And Kathleen, thank you for holding up the fort for me there. Um, As you can see, that particular segment was full of a lot of useful information and also a perspective that sometimes we don't often get to see or hear about, as we also look at the many problems that are impacting policing in America. There are some clear takeaways. I'm going to actually ask if the panel can help me as we weigh in on a few of those. Um, Certainly, if one was to track with many of the officers that you can see or from their actions that they're currently doing, or how things have changed during their tenure in the police force, that they have been subjected to reforms in the past. And some reforms apparently have made some difference, and yet some have not. So there are elements of police reforms that are there. And one of them, I think we could probably tell, was the concept of community policing, or being a little bit more in touch with those that you actually are serving. Um, I just want to just open up for our panelists. If you have any thoughts or takeaways of major things that came from that particular segment uh, regarding the elements of policing and how, in fact, uh, as one said, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, et cetera. Things are constantly changing in their arena.
Well, one of the things, Robbie, that I thought stood out was the phrase tip of the spear. And I feel that that is an unfortunate position for the police to be in, and the society to have be the case. We deal with a lot of chaos sometimes on our campus, and we have to call the police. And instead of the police, there's also a PERT squad that comes and can help and deal with the mental illness issues that are often cohabitating with the problems that we're dealing with. And that's something that I know some communities are starting to bring in, and not have the police be the tip of the spear, but instead support to others who are addressing some of these more complicated social issues like domestic violence and like homelessness and things that happen with people who have comorbidity and drug issues and things of that nature. So I feel that this societal choice of putting everything on the plate of the police it's a short-sighted one.
Yeah, and if I can just follow up on that, the argument, at least for me, is overwhelming. That I really appreciate the argument that one of the gentlemen made that, every 911 call you make, unless your house is on fire, is responded to by the police. And that I think makes a clear case that we've overburdened the police with the systemic load that we've placed on them. And there are clearly other professionals that can assist with responding to some of the challenge, with some of the crises in our communities, and that police perhaps are not the best equipped to respond to the breadth of emergencies that come into them, and that I think is that's just common sense. I also do think that one of the things that was sort of an argument at the beginning of the clip that I wonder about a little bit, if it might bear some examination, is that this is a problem that is due to the increase in technology and video surveillance. And I want to push back on that a little bit, because I think what we have now is, with technology and the accessibility of video surveillance, is accountability for the power that the police need to have to enact law enforcement. But that doesn't mean that the many times that abuses happen when they're not held accountable are not important. And that the lack of the accountability that mobile video, the lack of accountability that didn't exist before we had mobile phones, that doesn't mean the problem is new, right? Or that the problem only exists when it's caught on mobile video. So mobile video has brought it to light and makes it a problem that we can't avoid. We can't deny. We can't make it a he said she said argument when we're faced with these visceral and heart-wrenching videos that come out. And it underscores the depth of the problem that has existed well before these incidents have been caught on tape. That are not always about the systemic load that might be shared by other branches, other professionals, but in some cases are just plain systemic racism and bias when law enforcement is carrying out their law enforcement duties.
And thank you. I couldn't agree more. I would also add that one of the things that was mentioned, for all of the reforms and all of the efforts that apparently have been underway for some time, that is being undermined by the behaviors of bad actors, those who are actually in the profession and perhaps they really ought not be there. Their motivations can be many, but their actions are horrendous. And quite frankly, as one officer indicated, that they definitely want to put more attention to rooting these individuals out of the profession. But there are some components that keep them in. And despite diversity, inclusion, and equity initiatives that have been part of many of these police departments, there's still, if you will, a kind of a working culture among some in which bad actors still have a place to stay. It used to be called the blue wall, in which parties could not necessarily be held accountable for the things that they do, as long as they stick to it and stick to the protocol of adhering to the blue wall. There are legal protections that really relieve many individuals from being fully accountable for their actions. And also what we have learned in the most recent case, and we're about to show it in just a minute, there are tactical delays, even with the presence of body cameras and bystander phone cells, cameras, that there's still tactical delays in which some of these recordings don't come to light until 2 years have passed or so. Given a chance for giving the, if you will, the perpetrator an opportunity to kind of like step by most of their activities. So one thing that we will see as we look into the next component is the consequence of racial profiling. Some have referred to it as driving while Black, that in many ways the encounters with some of the bad actors within law enforcement has been one while parties have been either near or in their vehicle, being pulled over, and being basically treated in a manner that is very inconsistent with both normal protocol and not the way that other parties are treated, and particularly if the driver is African American or Hispanic. We're going to move to what I might say to you is might be somewhat disturbing for some of you. It's a video that's an opinion piece by the mother of a slain individual who died at the hands of police. Bear with me as we move to that in just a moment.
Losing a child in a fatal police encounter, Mona Hardin's pain is still very real and very raw. She shares her thoughts with us this morning.
I'm sorry. I'm scared. I'm your brother. These were some of my son's last words before he was killed. On May 10th, 2019, my son Ronald Green was tortured to death by Louisiana state troopers in Monroe, Louisiana. My son Ronnie was tasered, punched, and choked by white officers. They shackled Ronnie's wrists and ankles, pepper sprayed him while laying face down, and left him moaning for more than 9 minutes as they washed and wiped his blood from their hands and faces while he struggled to breathe, bleeding from their beating. Then the officers bragged to each other about what they did. When medical assistants finally got there, Ronnie was limp and unresponsive. He was loaded into the ambulance, cuffed to the bed rail, without any administration of oxygen or aid. After my son was killed by these cops, the call came. The Louisiana State Police lied to me and told me that he died in a car crash. They hid the body camera footage from the public for more than 2 years. I saw my son Ronnie murdered at the hands of those troopers. There's no way you can look at the body camera videos and not see that. I wish I could tell you that these officers have been convicted of crimes they did that night, but they have not. I wish I could tell you that justice has been served for my Ronnie, but it has not. No one has been held accountable for my child's death. We need these officers arrested for what they did that night. We need them to be indicted for this inhumane and unbelievable act of violence. If there's no accountability, deaths like Ronnie's will just continue. How many Black men, women, and children will be killed by the police before we make a real change? How many Black men, women, and children do we have to watch get slaughtered by white cops on camera? Ronnie was a father, a brother, an uncle, a friend to many. He was loved and taken too soon. Our family will never, ever be the same. I will never give up this fight for his justice.
And I think we're back. Um, that, of course, is a most recently revealed case. This is the sad part about many of these is that this is not in isolation, as horrendous as it is. And that I won't even call it the phenomenon, just say the tragedy of driving while Black and racial profiling has resulted in the deaths of a number of individuals. Probably in recent years, you may recall the story of Sandra Bland, who was driving to a new job um, from one coast to the other, I believe, and in Texas, that she actually encountered a problem in which she was being arrested primarily for not showing enough regard and perhaps I think she was asked to put out a cigarette and she did not understand that. And really the fundamental point was that she did not comply or did not respond to control questions, that she was apprehended and brought to jail and died in a jail cell, allegedly that she hung herself. These individuals simply deserve better. And this is actually unacceptable, but I think what we're finding with cell phone footage and body cam footage that eventually reaches the light of day, that in essence, we are coming across practices that never left us. These things were happening all along throughout the history of America, and they are still happening, but they're now under a different lens, and it's coming to the light of day. For our panelists, I would ask you a couple of questions regarding this. Have you, I guess for many of you, you are familiar with this story. Are you equally familiar with the fact that there's been so many instances of individuals, I would just say even within the last 6 years, in which we're seeing basically almost the assassination of someone on a cell phone camera?
I find it so interesting that people think that this is a new thing. Just even in the zeitgeist and in the general, even before 6 years, people would talk about driving while Black. I had a coworker who was from South Africa who he and his friends couldn't go down Pico Boulevard or Olympic Boulevard in LA and without getting stopped multiple times because it's a big long boulevard, so different police would stop them in different places. It's dangerous to interact with the police in these situations. It's the other officer in the other video talked about having the talk with his nephews and the fact that there has to be the talk means that this issue is long standing. So the body cam videos, I think, are so helpful in getting this to the forefront of our consciousness. The assassinations have happened, but now they're just happening on camera. And the fact that there is disregard for that still shows on the policeman's behalf, not couching their behavior in any way, shows the systemic, endemic issue that we're looking at here.
Yeah, I was in Texas at the time of Sandra Bland murder or death, and I'm from Texas, and I guess the way racism works in that part of the country is not. It's not as surprising because I was raised in it, and it was shocking. I had friends who were close by and protested at the sheriff's office where she died, and the brutality even to the people who were grieving her death was horrific. They would block off space under trees because in the hot summer sun, they didn't want the protesters to be able to get any shade. just a mean-spiritedness on the behalf of the police that I think is kind of indicative of the same kind of ability to deny that you heard in the video and see life and to dehumanize life, which is a huge part of the systemic racism that is this problem, to lack empathy and to see people as potential less than human objects rather than doing their job, which is to enforce the law. And you know, just one more thing, if I may, which is that even if someone is breaking the law and, you know, a turn signal is a very minor infraction, but even if it's something more egregious alleged, the police's job is not to have that result in a death. And when that happens, I've lived in Texas, so I have friends and family who think, well, they deserved it, and that's racism, because no one deserves to die at the hands of the police, unless there's lethal force that the perpetrator is bringing to bear that puts the police's lives on the line. And so I just think that the whole thing, with as Robbie was saying, bad actors on the side of the police who suppress video and suppress anyone who would question their techniques, make it really important to have accountability mechanisms. And I hope we'll be able to talk about that some more.
And just to add to that, it does seem in many ways now draw upon the most recent North Carolina problem, which was also horrific in many ways. That's the one in which officers riding in a pickup truck came early in the morning to arrest an individual allegedly for some drug infraction. And he was in his car, he started to drive away, and they shot him from many angles, including from the back, and then did not want to necessarily release the video. In fact, it took a long time, an extraordinarily long time, for the video to be released about this. And without a doubt, I will just share with you, my first impression is that whether it was their real intent or not, it appeared almost as if they were hunting. It was almost as if there was not necessarily, we're looking at a human being who might just, made a wrong turn, did something inappropriate. It's almost like it's hunting season. And if you look across the spectrum of the number of deaths that have happened, I think Jeff and Kathleen are correct. It is almost like a devaluing of life in which human beings are almost available for taking them down, to hunt them down, take them down, treat them in some inhumane fashion. And the evidence of it, quite frankly, is that same infraction by parties who are not Black or not Hispanic, seemingly very little consequences and certainly not a loss of life is normally the case. This is the other part of racism. It's as Jeff said correctly, it is constituted by political and legal structures that support it. But also it just gives rise to parties acting out some of their worst natures. It's the prejudice component. It's the part of microaggressions beyond measure. It is really, frankly, where parties have been given license to be racist and to take advantage of individuals or really abuse individuals' rights on the basis of race. This is the part that's going to take some time to, of course, whatever reform measures eventually surface next, because you're getting to the heart of what motivates people to do what they do. And that is something that we anticipate, frankly, now has been revealed to the light of day. And therefore, it's quite possible that some of the rooting out of bad actors, as mentioned by the earlier officer, might very well start to take place. One of the things that we did take a good look at, and also CBS covered it in their special on policing, was that there are, in fact, and I think Kathleen, you alluded to it just a little while ago, that there are some things put on a police officer's plate that ought not be there, including some type of interventions that are necessary to support people in crisis, whether it be homelessness, mental illness, that there are indeed parties who are better trained, better skilled, and do not necessarily present a armed individual threat to those parties who are in crisis. 60 Minutes, CBS Sunday Morning covered this by taking a look at San Francisco's efforts to redistribute funding to support their crisis response team. And if you bear with me, we'll go to that for just a brief moment.
Thousands of homeless people can be found on the streets of San Francisco and many other American cities, some of them grappling with mental health issues. John Blackstone looks at a pilot program aimed at helping both the homeless and the police.
San Francisco's roughest neighborhoods can seem dominated by the homeless, the mentally disturbed, and those openly using drugs.
Don't you need more police on the street to change that?
But San Francisco's Mayor, London Breed, is cutting the police budget.
We've got to look at things differently. The challenges that people face are not what they used to be, and a police response doesn't solve all of these issues.
So now in San Francisco, many calls to 911 no longer bring armed police officers.
How you doing today?
Instead, dispatchers send what the city calls a street crisis response team, trained to deal with mental health issues. Stephanie Cheery, a behavioral therapist, is on one of those teams.
When someone is experiencing a mental health crisis, especially psychosis, it can look scary to somebody to see a person who's talking to themselves or yelling into the sky.
It's scary, you call the police.
And now you can call and ask for us too.
In 2019, San Francisco police answered more than 50,000 calls related to mental health.
In our city, and I think throughout the nation, a lot of extra jobs and tasks have just been given to law enforcement because there's nobody else.
Fire Captain Simon Pang is in charge of the crisis response teams, whose members come from the city's health and fire departments. They do not carry guns.
People living in the streets often have a history of complex traumas, and law enforcement, somebody with a gun, can be very triggering and potentially escalating for someone like that.
So far this year, nationwide, more than 50 people with mental illness have been shot and killed by police. One study concluded that almost 25% of fatal police encounters involved mental illness.
Having a mental health crisis is not a crime, and it's not necessarily a public safety issue. So having our team here to be able to respond to those non-violent mental health calls is critical to free up the police to address what are actually public safety concerns.
As well as a mental health expert like Cheery, each crisis response team will have paramedics like Richard Platt and Leslie Fong, and one member like Michael Marchicelli. He's called a peer counselor because, well, he's been there, done that.
You know, when somebody says, do you have a license or a degree? I think the streets and drug addicts have been my degree.
There'll be limits to what we can do when it comes to our personal interactions. Michael doesn't have some of that. He is able to use his gut in a way that we usually can't.
You look pretty good.
Thank you.
Right now.
Thank you.
It wasn't always quite like this recently.
No, actually, it was the opposite.
Earlier this year, Jermaine Reeves was living on the streets of San Francisco's Tenderloin district. In desperation, he sought help from one of the street crisis teams. They found him a place to live.
It was a godsend, and it was right on time. And, you know, it was the first people who actually listened to me.
He says he would never go to the police for help.
Like, if a police shows up right now, you guys wouldn't think anything of it. My heart would start beating fast. I would wonder, like, what are they over here for? I would start looking around to see if it's some other black people. Like, you know, it's just not a good situation that ends for people that look like me.
With police reform now an issue across the country, several cities are developing programs like the one in San Francisco. Mayor London Breed.
So what this program is doing is taking away some calls that used to go to the police, taking some duties away from the police. Is this defunding the police?
Well, I don't like to label it. The issue here is we have to think about policing differently than we ever have before, especially in light of what we see the data shows us. The goal is to meet people where they are, to develop rapport, to have a conversation, to treat them like human beings no matter what they're going through, and to make sure that you build trust within seconds. And that could make all the difference.
And Kathleen, I think you alluded to the fact, I'm sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I'm sorry. You alluded to the fact that San Diego has something similar in play already.
Yeah, the PERT team, PERT, is a team that comes out and they work on the situation and to find certain. Okay, now can you hear me? Sorry. Yeah, so they de-escalate situations and they do it in a way that also offers services. I'll use an example. One of our regular people who are actually not allowed on campus because he's been a big disturbance has come, and we've had the PERT team come and work with him, and they were able to get him some food and some housing for the night and de-escalate his manic situation. He was on drugs at the time, and we're able to like calm him down. And that's not something the police are really there to do. We've called the police and it takes them 2 hours to come out to us because it's not as high a priority to help us with a homeless person as it is to maybe do other calls that they're getting. So there's a priority issue as well. So yeah, basically the one thing I did want to say about this was the psychology and social work education that these other workers, these other service officers are provided and work and do. I feel that there is a lack of education for the general populace of the police force. They don't have a very strong requirement for higher education, as you saw on one of the slides there, only 2-year degrees for many of them, and even that is not required. I know there's a vetting process, but you know, I just think there needs to be more social skills and social work added into what is required. But that's just my opinion.
We actually have a parishioner who's a social worker on one of the PERT teams attending one of our 8 o'clock services. And the PERT teams are a great thing. I think the challenge in San Diego is that we don't have very many of them. So the funding issue is again one of the big hopes, perhaps, for how we can, perhaps where we might want to consider seeing how we could work on making some, maybe helping to put some pressure to expand that program.
And just a question for you both. Would you believe that if there's any reallocation of funds, in this case for the PERT team here in San Diego, is that a reflection of defunding the police in some way?
I think defunding the police is a real trigger for some people and not for others. And I think it's the understanding of reallocation. And if they could say reallocate the police, I think it might be a different feeling towards it. But I think it is a way to defund something that's an aggressive military state type of organization. I mean, in my lifetime, the weaponization of the police force has exponentially grown with the type of assault vehicles and things and the SWAT and all of this. And I think that there's been a heavy funding of that. And I think the reallocation of those funds into something that is better utilized by if you have 50,000 police calls for people with mental illness, how are we not doing more for mental illness and addressing those? That's how I feel.
Well said. And Robbie, I'm looking forward to hear how you answer this question as well. And I think, on the mental health question alone, if you have a medical injury, you call and you want an ambulance. You want somebody trained in emergency medical, physical medicine to respond. For some reason that I don't understand, we expect emergency psychiatric situations to be handled by people with absolutely no training or very minimal training at best, but not professional psychiatric responders. We're trying to change that a little bit with PERT. But we had a federal legislation several years ago that put psychiatric and psychological services at parity with medical services. And yet our emergency responses are not at parity with medical response in that way. In terms of defunding the police, I'm of two minds on it. The radical in me wants to sort of wipe everything out and start over. Because some of the things that we studied in Sacred Ground, like the police, really, it's not a good history. It doesn't have a good foundation. From the very beginnings of the use of law enforcement to track down runaway slaves, to the post-Civil War era Jim Crow kinds of laws and targeting of African Americans in ways that white people just weren't. We have a problem deeply rooted in our DNA that is also deeply rooted in our policing system. And so in some ways, I'm of the mind that unless we do something deeply, deeply at a foundational level to restructure our policing system, we're going to continue to have problems. At a more pragmatic level, we've seen a backlash to the word defunding the police. We've seen that people get scared. I know when I have if somebody's chasing me or if somebody's breaking into my house, I want the police to respond. So it may be a more incremental kind of approach that we need to take until we know what, big sweeping reform doesn't usually win from a pragmatic perspective. So I don't know what that sweeping reform would look like, but these smaller incremental reforms do seem to at least have some viability. But I'm very interested, Robbie, in what your take is.
Well, actually, I raised the question because actually it was raised in the segment when that was asked of the mayor of San Francisco, and she artfully indicated that she'd rather look at it not by putting a label on it, but making sure the assets go where the assets are needed. So it is a reallocation of assets issue. I also raised it just to be a little bit provocative. So thank you both for fielding the question. But I think the pragmatic approach makes perfect sense that indeed, in some cases, what everyone probably is looking for, particularly in the case of racially motivated encounters, is accountability and for parties to be spot on about the fact that they serve communities, they don't necessarily stalk communities. And that is, if one wants to find a lever to try to encourage that accountability, I think you found that you can see that some folks have moved toward defunding the police. Frankly, the truth be told is that the police are needed desperately, and particularly police who are more reflective of the community that they live and work for, that for them to be more reflective of that community. So an example would be the DEI initiatives that's been in police forces, where you're beginning to see, frankly, the changing configuration of who's in the police group. Those things, I think you won't see immediate change that's going to make a difference or cancel out all bad actors, but you don't want to throw out the baby in the bathwater at the same time, particularly when crime and other type of things can run manifest in select areas. So it's necessary to have the police. It's also very necessary for them to both be accountable and to actually feel accountable to the communities that they serve. And I think, frankly, the officers that were presented in the CBS Sunday morning piece actually honored their profession by presenting it well and being frankly open-minded and objective about the situation they find themselves in. So in short, it's not a zero-sum game where you have to, there's only this one pot of money, and that pot of money goes either to the police or somewhere else. We have to be very strategic in how we allocate funds as a society, but quite frankly, it also doesn't need to be a political football in the sense that it's we do have needs. We are a civilized society. For it to be maintained. Then parties who actually are there to serve and protect actually should be able to do that and have ample training. Well, I think we're running out of time here, but I also wanted to share leave the room open for maybe 5 minutes if we can for any comments that may come from our audience, a larger audience, as we've covered a few of the topics associated with policing in America and its relationship to systemic racism. If any of you have like to say something, if you could either raise your hand in the reaction in the participant place, or wave your hand in the air. That may work as well. Jeff is scouring the
I see
any faces. Okay.
I see Diane Lopez Hughes, and then I think I saw another hand too, but I'll get you back in, and then Anita after Diane.
Well, Anita might be sharing what I want to share, but maybe not. So I'll just mention, she and I saw a wonderful presentation, I guess you could call it, with Wonderscapes at Liberty Station. They may do it again next weekend, but it is a powerful presentation called Traveling While Black. And it's a virtual experience where you are sitting in a diner with people who are sharing their stories, and it is intense. Anyway, so if there is another showing, I will be happy to share that. I guess the other thing I wanted to say, more important, well, just as importantly, is that as we did with Sacred Ground, it's important, it's essential to know the history before we can take steps to move to action. And the article that I put in the chat is from the American Bar Association on how, I can't remember the very end of it, but it indicates that, the way the policing in America started, it's not a surprise that it's where it is right now. So I encourage people to look at that at least, or at least look into the history of policing in the United States. And there are plenty of articles on that. The other thing I wanted to say really quickly is that I hope we do some research on what's going on with PERT, and maybe we could do a petition or a letter writing or something to the city to increase the funding or something, or work along with other organizations like Surge that might be doing the same thing. So thank you.
Thank you,
Anita, and then Paul Hagan. Anita, you're still on mute.
Okay. That was a wonderful presentation today in Liberty Station using virtual reality. It was my first time exposed to virtual reality, and it was very, very powerful. But I just want to say why I'm here. I am concerned about police accountability. It's bad enough when you have someone shot in the back or be unarmed and murdered by the police, and there's no accountability. That's like two crimes. It exacerbates the situation. And that cannot happen in a democratic society. And as Christians and people of all faiths, we cannot stand by and do nothing. There are two kinds of sins, what we do and what we fail to do. And when our fellow human beings are being murdered, Black and brown people, what would Jesus do? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Paul Hagan.
So my question would be, I wonder where the police unions are in all of this. You don't seem to hear too many comments about them. There was something from them in La Mesa when it talked about some of the defunding issues, but I mean, unless the police unions get behind this, it's going to be a long, long process. So I'd like to hear comments on that from the panel.
I can say I'm not very aware here about the unions. I'm from Chicago originally, though, and I used to have police officers as friends, and there is a blue wall for sure, just like Robbie was talking about. And that union is there to, protect their people and not work in conjunction with anything else. At least that's how it used to be. And Chicago's pretty infamous for their police force and what they do there. So that's just my personal experience. Other than that, I would say it's definitely worth looking into here as one of our action items to see not only what is the position of the union, but also the way that we could advocate for more of the PERT work and things of that nature.
Well, and I just think it's in unions' best interests. Cops don't want to be hated, right? And so I think the CBS piece did an excellent job of talking about the benefits of community policing. I was talking to a former police officer on Friday night, talking about how community policing's been a thing for a while in different communities and the benefits of it. This was a person of color, and cops do not want to. There are exceptions, but they stand to gain from better community relations and better focus on what they do well and sharing the load with other organizations like PERT who are better equipped to do what PERT does. So it seems to me like it's a win-win for everybody when things like that happen. And I can't imagine that cops would have a problem with that. At least the ones I know don't have any problem with it. Agnes, did you have your hand? Oh, go ahead, Robbie, sorry.
I'm sorry. No, just quickly was going to say there's also a recent example of the blue wall being fractured. And that was with Derek Chauvin's killing of George Floyd, and that there were other officers in the mix, and became rather clear that parties weren't going to just stand and either lie or take the fall for someone else. And I think their representation also saw that as well. So it's some things would have, if it's a bright enough light shown on it, I think no one wants that attention. And yet at the same time, to Jeff's point, most cops want to function in an ethical and accountable manner. And I think the unions, for the most part, support that, but they may not necessarily be as willing to stand fully behind a bad actor, particularly if it's been caught on camera performing bad acts.
Agnes, did you have your hand up?
I did. I have a couple of different thoughts that are coming to my mind.
First of all, my understanding is that we only have 2 or 3 PERT teams in all of San Diego. And we need to at least expand that so that there's like 1 per precinct, because if one team is busy, that's what happens. Because this is a 24-hour need. And if one team is busy, then it means that's why sometimes it's 2 hours before the team gets there. And that's too long in a lot of volatile situations to be waiting. The other thing is, I think that we need to stop the police trying to stop people for really minor traffic violations like taillights out and expired registration. I think that could be handled the same way that for a while anyway, stoplight violations were being handled. I should think that when the policeman sees that, they could take a picture and the person could get a notice in the mail that their taillight is out and please get it fixed, or that their registration is expired and please handle that. Because with the license plate, if they take a picture of the license plate, they have access to a person's address who owns the car and is responsible for things like taillights. And if you could just eliminate all stops for those minor things, you would avoid a lot of the situations that have happened. And the other thing is that we need to take maybe look at what happens in other countries. I know that in parts of Scandinavia, police training is a 2 to 3 year actual police academy, where here it's just a matter of weeks, or a few months. It's not even a full year any place in the United States where people have to be in the police academy. I think a lot of police are undertrained for the jobs that they're being asked to do. And that's not their fault. It's the fault of the people who set up the programs and organize the departments and say, 3 months is enough training, let's put you out on the street. And it's not enough, especially here in San Diego, we get a lot of retired military, but it's a different mindset that they need for the police than the military. So even they need more training, but maybe they don't need as much training as somebody who's fresh out of high school, which is true that when you are fresh out of high school, you're eligible to apply for the police academy. And it's just not enough training, not enough maturity either for young police officers. So that's what I had. Those are the thoughts that came to my mind.
Thank you, Agnes. You actually reminded me that there was also in that same CBS Sunday morning program, they did talk about how limited our training is by comparison. And quite frankly, that I guess we can look at it this way, that there's also the issue of, let's say that we are learning. There has been some changes you may have noticed over the years, but after horrific things have happened. An example would be high-speed chases through residential neighborhoods. New protocols have gone into play because it simply wasn't worth it to try to chase someone down. And yet still monitor the person all the way through until you get them to a certain point where other people are not put at risk. That's something that simply we would think off the top. It's like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. But it took trial and error and a lot of loss of life before that became a protocol. I will say that it's interesting to see what's going to happen with the DEI initiatives that's happening within law enforcement, and whether the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are going to bear fruit. Jeff, was there someone else who had a question?
I do not see any others right now.
Thanks, Jeff.
Oh, Anita, it looks like Anita may be waving.
Is that a wave?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't understand, what does DEI stand for?
Oh, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, well, let's see. We're out of time. Let me mention and share with you what's going to come up next. As you know, we have 10 of these town hall meetings scheduled. The next topic that's coming up, it would be an examination of hate crimes, the escalation of hate crimes in our society, and potential remedies about it, but really to take a good examination of what's causing this as well. There was a question earlier on about whether or not we had a website to cover Sacred Ground in Action and its many actions and activities. One is actually in development. It's will be available to you and built out very quickly. But the good news is that this town hall is just one of many items that's happening. We will be also taking a look at the audit that was done by the Episcopal Church and on race and racism. And we'll examine that a little bit further. There are an educational pillar in which we're taking a look at all the type of resources that would be available for our community. Please look out for more of that. And of course, truly Sacred Ground in Action, what type of activities, actions, and efforts you can participate in to actually put your energies into motion and to be, if you will, an anti-racist, which is also now known as meaningful action. There almost being an equivalency there between anti-racist and meaningful actions that may be taken. And there are a number of them. So we're going to lay those out for you so you can see what some things parties can do right now.
So if I can show the website to you real quick.
Please.
So if you go to our website, can you see this page right now? You see the website? So this is our homepage. You can either go under Outreach, Sacred Ground in Action, or right now there also happens to be a little ad for it right here. And you click on that button. And you'll see an introduction here. This will always be the next upcoming town hall. It's always, I think as Robbie said, the second Sunday of the month at 6 o'clock. So that will change shortly to our next topic. And then down here is where we're going to accumulate the individual actions. This is still a work in progress. So right now the list is not built out yet, but in the next week or so, we hope that this will be built out and we'll have all these resources linked for you as we work to build that out. And then I'll invite you to, as you consider our conversation tonight, as you think of things we might do, like put together, work together with another organization, maybe to talk to City Council about funding PERT or things like that. Email me, and as I start to transition out, we'll have other contacts. But we have different leads for those 3 different columns, and they'll work on curating these resources. If you think of things to add to those, email me, and we'll work on getting the contact names added to that page so you can email them directly, and we can keep this an ongoing list and start to build some momentum of action as we move forward.
Jeff, there is one more hand up. I just wanted to point it out.
I see Carol. Is that it? Okay, thank you. Carol.
My question would be, is there any information available to us about screening procedures or ideal profiles for people who choose to pursue a career of going into law enforcement, rather than looking at the problem at the other end of trying to oust people who are really abusing the privilege of being police officers. What about screening? What about ideal profiles for people that wish to serve in this way?
I will say my understanding is there's a very long vetting process, and even with that vetting process, it still doesn't weed them all out. Again, my feeling of a higher education and longer education, I think might do some vetting of its own. and really get more dedicated and sympathetic, empathetic officers into a position to help the community as we are, I think, collectively want them to.
Okay.
And I really think, you know, I think individual bad actors is one thing, but I think another component is culture and systemic change that has to happen. Because I think in some cases, it's individual bad actors, but that's reinforced by systemic challenges that individual screening might help with, but when it's backed up with a systemic problem of, you know, like one of the conversations we didn't get to tonight, but does a chokehold have a place in policing? That's a systemic question. That's not as much of a question about individual actors. Individual actors misusing it maybe, but does it even have a place? That's a bigger question. So I think it's a both and individual actors and bigger questions about the systemic, cultural, and bias issues all around, along with accountability and how you make those kinds of changes.
And just to also add to that, the ways and means of policing, it seems to be changing, but it's a very slow change. Chokeholds, and thank you, Jeff, for bringing that up. There are some practices that were bad from the start. They also are maybe carryovers from a more military posture. And it's interesting to see how they are now, some people are fighting and defending it, but at the same time, it kind of goes back to the people that you're trying to protect or serve. Just a quick segue over to recruitment. There's also a concern by many municipalities to have their officers live in closer proximity to the communities they serve. So it's not as if they are kind of like patrolling a siege area, that they actually get to know the people that they're trying to support, and the people get to know them. In some cases, that's mandatory for a few cities, at least within some reason or some geographic range. But it does, it is a good technique to some degree to have people not being so disconnected or from those other folks, or in fact have the tendency to disenfranchise those that they actually serve. So it's a moving target. A lot that we'll probably come back and talk about this a little bit more. I would like to take this moment to thank our panelists, both Kathleen Burgess and Jeff Martinhawk, for their wonderful support.
There's another hand.
We have one more hand. That'll be the very
so
last
sorry.
question. That's C. Jill. I can't tell the first name from it's an email address.
Yes, hello. I'm sorry. I tried to change it, but I couldn't.
It's okay.
My name is Sandy. I'm sort of related loosely to Robbie. My name is Sandy Ewell, and to Robbie and Rocky. So hi, Robbie's my brother. One of the things that I wanted to just, and you all went through this quite eloquently, but I think that what we need to do, besides policy changes, but also incorporate in the training more emphasis on understanding underlying issues of attitudes and behavior, and not a 3-hour module, but it needs to be an ongoing, deliberate training on racial justice, on anti-bias work, on anti-sexism work. And, you know, because otherwise, no matter what we do, as long as folks are still harboring those attitudes, change is going to be even slower. So thank you for recognizing me. I appreciate it.
Hi, sis.
Hi, baby. Coming in from the East Coast. And this has been marvelous. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you who have been part of this audience and being patient through some of our technical glitches and everything, but more to come. And certainly we're going to have more folks serving both as panelists and also having more feedback from the audience with our future town hall meetings. So till next time, I'd like to thank you and look forward to our next opportunity to chat. Take care.
I want to give a shout out to Sacred Ground 6. Most of us are here, so thank you, team.
Okay.
Good job.
Take care.
Good job.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you, Robbie.